And now, live from Bacon, it's Claudine Morales and Young with Howdy Partner. Take it away, Claudine.
Twitch, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Howdy Partner, where we highlight AWS Partner Network partners doing cool stuff to help AWS customers and enhance their experience with use of AWS. I'm a solutions architect here. I've been here a little over 3 years now, and I am joined today by one of my colleagues, Young. Young, who are you?
Hey, how you doing, Twitch? My name is Young Jung. I think this is my, I've lost count, so 4th or 5th time hosting. Glad to be here. I'm also a partner solutions architect here at AWS. And with the two of us, we have Manish from Okta. Want to introduce yourself in a little bit?
Manish.
Hey, Young, Claudine, and all the viewers on this Twitch channel. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be part of this Howdy Partner series representing Okta. I'm a solution architect, and I usually work with the strategic accounts of Okta, and many of them are also customers of AWS. And Okta provides an identity platform to manage both the workforce and customers. And in this session, I'm going to be primarily talking about customer identity, where apps provide an experience for consumers, be it B2C, B2B, or B2B2C, to interact with that app. And on this session, I also hope to showcase how Okta and AWS combined provide the best solution for building out such web and mobile apps.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing your demo and hearing everything you have to say about identity management. But on that topic, I would love to first talk about identity and access management, AWS Identity and Access Management, or IAM, because I don't think you can talk about any AWS service without touching on IAM, and I think this is a very, very good tie-in to what you're going to cover today, Manish. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I think, Young, you're going to talk about Cognito just in a few minutes here. So what is IAM? IAM is responsible for giving you the ability to manage access to your AWS environment securely. And we say this often, but it's because it's true, but security is job zero here at AWS. So with IAM, you can create identities and permissions that you can attach to these identities that you created to allow or deny them access to your AWS resources. And you can be granular with the permissions that you're granting these identities with IAM. IAM allows you to restrict or allow access to users or groups to all or only specific resources in your AWS environment. So I'm going to go over some really, really fundamental IAM concepts. I know there's so much to say about this service, but I'm going to just hit on really, really critical things here. And AM, helping us from his office in Austin, is going to help me share my screen. It would help if I could actually get myself set up here correctly. Can you see my screen?
You're good. You're good.
Awesome. Great. So let's talk about the types of identities that you can actually create with IAM. The first one here is an IAM user, which represents a single entity. This is a person who, or maybe an application that interacts with AWS. There are certain fundamental best practices that you should be observing when interacting with your AWS account. So the very first thing you need to do as soon as you open an AWS account is create an IAM user for yourself. When you first open an account, the only entity that's created by default is your AWS root user. And this is super powerful. You can actually destroy a lot of things with it if you're not careful. So we do recommend locking up your root user credentials and only using root when you absolutely have to. There are going to be a few tasks that are going to need root user login when interacting with AWS, but outside of those, you need to be using an IAM user. Of course, it's also best practice to enable multi-factor authentication, or MFA, on your IAM user. And you should really be enforcing this as a requirement for all IAM users in your organization. So the other type of identity that you can create with IAM is a group. IAM groups are a collection of an IAM group is a collection of IAM users. So if you have hundreds of IAM users in your org that you need to manage, you may find that it's going to be time consuming to be managing those users individually. So groups allow you to manage multiple resources at once. And then there's the IAM role. An IAM role is an identity that contains specific access permissions. So for example, a role may contain read-only access to a specific Amazon S3 bucket, or a role may contain permissions to access a specific DynamoDB table. A role is really like an IAM user, except that anyone can assume a role. And when you assume a role, it gives you temporary security credentials for that particular role session. So it's helpful for granting short-lived access to entities that don't normally have access to your AWS resources. You can even use a role for access into an AWS account that is outside of yours. So for example, you need an account, or you need access to an account that's owned by one of your customers. What you really want to do in those types of scenarios is use role-based access instead of collecting your customer's IAM credentials and then using those long-term credentials to access their account. So many things could go wrong if you end up compromising. Hi, Bacon. Bacon just walked up to me and he told me to tell you guys hello from him. So as I was saying, so many things could go wrong if you end up compromising your customer's long-term credentials. Of course, as best practice overall, the permissions you grant for any of the IAM identities that you create should be based on the concept of least privilege. You should only really allow access to identities that absolutely need access, and only where it's needed and nothing more. It's also a great idea actually to audit your permissions regularly so that you are sure that your policies are up to date. Maybe you have policies that are attached to certain entities that have changed job responsibilities or whatnot, and their permissions should also change. You should have a process for managing these types of scenarios as best practice. Another thing I want to quickly touch on is identity federation. And I know Manish will have a lot more to say about this and why it's a huge benefit for an enterprise. But IAM does support identity federation. If you're with a big organization and you have a lot of people who need access to your AWS resources, you may not want to go the route of creating an individual IAM user for each person. It's going to be just a lot of work to create and manage every single one of those. So IAM allows you to enable identity federation to eliminate that work. You can leverage your organization's existing directory service to allow folks in your org to access your AWS services. Manish will talk more about how Okta can help you with that. But before I kick it over to Manish, Young, let's briefly talk about Amazon Cognito, which is an AWS service that you can use to handle user authentication to web and mobile apps. Young, you want to walk us through how it works?
Sure. Before we do that, I think there's some demand from the viewers about who Bacon is, and I think they want some screen time for Bacon. So if
Bacon,
you can do that while I start.
Come here, buddy. Sure, I can make that happen.
So
is Bacon.
while everyone has their attention on Bacon, I will quickly go over Cognito in a nutshell. So Claudine talked about IAM as a way to manage your access on your AWS account, but as a developer, as you're creating your app, maybe you have a user base that you want people to log into your app to access certain parts of your application. That's where we have Amazon Cognito is a service to kind of help you out with creating your user pool. And some of the concepts we already touched based on, generated identity applies here. Something we haven't really specifically talked about was authentication and authorization. Difference being, let's just say we have this group of 3 individuals that you see on your screen, and you want to join this chat. Well, we have to sort of identify who you are, right? And be able to figure out, let's just say if Claudine and Manish are here, I want to come and join, they're going to be like, hey, who are you? And I would be like, oh, my name is Young. Well, how do they know that I'm Young? And how do they know that I am who I claim that I am? So sort of being able to figure out who you say you are is the portion we like to call authentication. And once you're authenticated, of course, there are things that I could do in this chat. For myself, it is appearing on the screen and talking to you guys at the moment. For someone like AM, who's our amazing operator in the background, his authorized to do things like operate this Twitch stream and do everything in the background, but he necessarily does not have the permissions to appear on screen. Well, being the operator that he is, he may just force himself to be on screen, but that's a different story for a different day. So that is what we call authorization. So Amazon Cognito is a service that we have that allows you to create what we call user pools. Now, user pools, and it might be better to kind of demonstrate this. So AM, if I could share my screen and kind of show what is going on here. So on our screen is my AWS console, and bear with me that there are many ways to kind of do this, but in your console, you can simply go search in the bar, and if I can spell Cognito, you can sort of get started. Cognito is divided into sort of 2 different pools called user pool and identity pool. User pool is more on the side of authentication, so being able to create, your username and password. Identity pool is more of linking that with AWS credentials and to be able to kind of restrict your access based on what is really necessary, which is what Claudine alluded to earlier with the granting least privilege. So it's as easy as it appears. So if you want to create a user pool, and funny enough, I've already created a user pool before for another episode of Howdy Partner, which is a good segue to kind of plug in that we have different episodes that you can go back and watch on our library of other on-demand episodes. But anyways, we can always create a new user pool. Let's just say for pool name, Howdy Partner, Okta. And the way it makes it pretty easy for you to kind of either go through the defaults, or you can step through and set up different settings. And, as you would expect, there are different ways of controlling different properties about your user pool. So, emails, usernames, password length, and so on and so forth. So it just makes it very easy. It even has MFA capabilities there. So if you create a user pool, That's basically it. You can create user pool. Obviously, you have to then use this to connect it to your app. You may have a UI that you're kind of making that connection with your application for your user to be able to sign in and out. There's also other options that you can use, and this is for the identity pool. So now here we're setting up our authorization part of it. And this one has a little more option that you need to fill out. But let's see, Howdy partner. Just say identity. And we can use a basic flow. Oh, oops. You cannot use dash, you can use underscores. And it even allows you to, what is really cool about this is that it even allows you to use different service identity providers. So you can see, we can use a Cognito user pool that we created previously. You can also use third-party, your typical social media or your other identity pools like, Amazon, you have Facebook, Google. You can even use different standards such as OpenID and SAML. And I think Manish is also going to cover a little bit in detail about those identity providers. So if you create, you have to select, I believe, your identity pool. But that's everything I have to share with Cognito. It is very easy for you to set up your user, and I can stop sharing the screen, Ian. It makes it really easy for you to create your user pool and really get started without having to manage all that comes with creating authorization and authentication. But now, there might be other more complicated or more granular levels of controls that you want to have when you're creating your identity provider and setting it up for your app. And that's where we have Manish here to talk to us more about what Okta does and how you can kind of leverage that into creating a more secured app. So take it away, Manish.
Thanks, Young, and thanks, Claudine. I first want to start off by just following up on what Claudine had spoken about, which is IAM for AWS itself. When you log into your AWS console, you don't necessarily need to use the credentials which are created in AWS. You can use a directory such as Okta itself and use Okta to single sign-on into AWS and manage your services using those credentials or IAM roles as you define in there. So that's what we consider the workforce side of things, which Okta is very strong in. And I'm a custom identity specialist. I work with teams or companies who want to build apps where they need those apps secured for access to users, to end users. These could be direct users in the case of B2C. In the case of B2B, they could be partners or vendors or suppliers. And also there's this third category, which is enterprise SaaS. So think about the big collaboration companies where they have other companies signed up, but it's their employees who need to end up accessing that collaboration app, right? So these are the type of companies that I work with, and I want to highlight the customer identity side of Okta in this session. So you might be wondering, AWS already has Cognito. It works well out of the box with a lot of the AWS services. So why Okta? And I want to start off with saying that it's great that developers are thinking about using an IAM platform. to build out this identity infrastructure, because it is a very difficult problem. There are a lot of security implications with building this out from scratch. It's just not a matter of throwing on a login form or a registration form and having a database of users. There's a lot of things which go around making sure that this is a secure piece of infrastructure. And it's not just related to passwords or logging in and creating sessions, but also, more importantly, developers are scarce, and we want developers to focus on the business problem at hand rather than dealing with stuff which is already available, and without having to reinvent the wheel and making sure that this critical piece of infrastructure is running 24/7. So, Cognito is great. Developers can start out by building out web and mobile experiences for the customer identity needs. But, having worked with some of the largest companies over the many years at Okta, we find that IAM is more than just building out the user pools and the user populations. It's more than just building out the login and registration capabilities. We need to think about the journey of the customer and experiences that need to be unlocked along the way, from the point of proofing a end user. So, Young, you already spoke about, how do you identify that you're Young and you're Claudine? Maybe there's some ID proofing infrastructure, and Okta doesn't provide it, but Okta provides a platform where, just like Lego blocks, you can snap them in and build out these experiences. So maybe there's a critical application where you need to use your driver's license or your passport to identify yourself. Or there's a place where you need to progressively profile the user from somebody who just landed on your website, and you probably just captured a little information about them, like the email address, and then start enriching the profile as they continue accessing some more portions of their website. And we all know about the consent and privacy regulation demands. I live in San Francisco, and CCPA is only going to become a hard requirement, just like GDPR is in Europe. So you have consent and privacy, which is something which you need to think about. How is an end user going to share data with apps or with other third-party data sinks of information? How do you syndicate this data with other platforms? And more importantly, it's about operationalizing security controls. So, and without having to write code and scripts, how do you ensure that the good guys are coming in and accessing your apps, but the bad actors, whether they're bots or somebody building out a phishing attack or doing some password spray or a dictionary password attack, those guys are being kept out. So I would, AM, if I could share my screen right now, I would say that Okta provides an enterprise platform. So I'm just going to share my screen, and here we go. All right. So what does Okta provide for customer identity? We are an enterprise-grade platform for building out, all those constructs which I spoke about, while also providing a broad, rich APIs and SDKs, which developers can utilize to interact with the platform. So whether you're doing authentication, you're trying to use passwords or maybe not use passwords, you want to use SMS messages or magic links. With some of the newer phones and devices, you have WebAuthn. So in the case of Apple, you want to use Touch ID or some biometrics to identify and authenticate the user. You want to authorize the user, so the user is logged in, but that doesn't mean that the user automatically has access to all the customer apps, all the apps which a company might need to provide. You want to provide authorization at an app level and probably at a more finer grain level. You want to do user management. This is especially important in the case of multi-tenant SaaS apps, where companies need to be delegated the administration capabilities to manage the users. So only based on the licenses, they can end up accessing the applications. So we provide a rich set of APIs for doing indeed this user management. We have adaptive MFA, which is contextual MFA. So based on some information, a MFA can be selectively triggered, which could be ranging from transactional MFA, where the user is logged in and accessing the site, but when they need to perform some critical tasks, such as submitting an order from their shopping cart or transferring money in the bank, you want an MFA flow to be triggered. Or it could be as simple as you've noticed that user has been accessing the system from California, and suddenly a new login comes in 600 miles away in a different location. In that case, you aren't very sure whether you're using a VPN or it's a bad actor. In that scenario, you can trigger a prompt for an MFA requiring the user to re-authenticate themselves with a stronger factor. And the next, which is called a federated identity, it might be the case that the source of truth for the users is not an Okta itself. You're getting this from another federated identity store. It could be AWS itself. You could be using SAML or any compliant OIDC store to federate out those identities and provide a mechanism to incorporate those users in the user population. And finally, there's lifecycle management. There's this the process of this user from someone who just showed up and is just a prospect to somebody who actually created a profile and set up their account, and as they're enriching them to the point where they're no longer a part of that app and they need to be deactivated or deleted. So we provide those lifecycle management capabilities as a broad set of APIs. We also have an identity layer. So we have hooks. So we know that not everything is cookie cutter. Companies need to extend the platform by themselves. So we provide these hooks either inline or asynchronous. So anytime a user is created or they change the password, you can get a webhook call letting you know that something's happened. Or if somebody's registered, you can have an inline hook to enrich the user. If you already have a database and you want to enrich the profile information, we have Okta Identity Engine, which allows you to have per app authorization capabilities, where you can specify what kind of factors you want to use to identify and authenticate the users. And also we have this rich integration ecosystem where you can plug and play with many of those vendors who add functionality such as ID proofing, MFA, or maybe even system logs, and being able to look at that and create dashboards and understand how the system is performing, while at the same time providing you the highest level of security certifications, which you may have for your particular needs. Like if you're in healthcare and you need a HIPAA compliant system, we have HIPAA compliance, or we can help you get HIPAA compliance. If you have FedRAMP for our federal customers, we have ISO 27018, and we have SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. So we have all these attestations which allow you to securely build out the application based on the Okta Identity Cloud. So I know this was a dense slide, but it was imperative for me to point out why customers would want to use Okta for building out their customer identity infrastructure, while probably starting out with something like Cognito and then progressing to Okta. Back to you, Young and Claudine.
Oh, that was great. That was a pretty thorough explanation. Just for all the viewers out there and those of you who are just strolling in, this is AWS Howdy Partner. we are on here to highlight our partner and what they're doing and some of the cool things they're doing. We have on here with Manish from Okta. He just spoke a little bit about how Okta works and some of the inner workings and why you should choose Okta. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, and if you have questions as we go along, please let us know on the chat. We'll get those answered. And now I think we're here to see what everybody's here to see, Manish, which is the cool demos that you're going to present to us. So take it, I guess it's back to you.
Okay, it's back to me. And folks on the Twitch channel, feel free to ask your questions and I will get to it either as the demo is progressing and there's some time to spare, or we can table it to the end of the meeting. All right.
Well, we're getting a question in the chat. The question is, where does the name Okta come from?
All right. So I need to give credit to the founders of the company. So the founders actually came from Salesforce, which was one of the first SaaS cloud companies. And they felt the need to manage these SaaS resource and provide access to employees or the workforce solutions. So they wanted a witty name associated with cloud. So Okta actually means level of visibility. And this is a terminology used in aviation. So there's Okta 1 to Okta 8, and Okta 8 means the clearest or the cloud is. I'm not quite sure, but this is what he spoke about, and I remember it very well. So it's a really cool name. So anything associated with cloud, that's what Okta is, and that's what it stands for.
So I just did a little bit of Googling. What does the word Okta mean? And this is what I got. An Okta is a unit of measurement used to describe the amount of cloud cover at any given location. So, yeah.
Yep. And if my founders are watching this, I hope they can give me kudos because I didn't Google that to answer this question.
Great work, Manish. All right, let's see a demo. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to show us and learning more about the product.
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm sure as techies, we've had that friend come to us saying, "I have this business idea. Can you build this app or this website to showcase some functionality?" Right? I mean, have you ever gotten that question? Yes. Yep. I mean, just like I get questions like, "Hey, you're a techie. Can you help fix my router?" So I get a lot of these questions. So what I'm going to be doing today is showing you how to build an app which allows you to not only authenticate users, but also register users, but also allow these users to access the core part of your product, which is your core resources. So I'm going to be building out a web app. It is a single page app. And also, if time permits, and I think we'll have enough time for, because we're using Okta, to show you how we can do something similar using mobile. So I'm going to share my screen. And Claudine or Young, if you can share the link for the AWS Howdy partner, I would really appreciate that. Was my screen already shared? It was. All right. Are you seeing my screen right now?
Yes, looks good to me.
All right. So I think Young or Claudine, you're going to share this link. It's a public repo. I built this out, and you can definitely use this to follow along. I just got to tell you, the longest time for this demo on a clean machine was in the configuration of the prerequisites. So we're going to be using AWS CLI. We're going to use Node. It's a all JavaScript app from the front end to the back end. We're going to have NPM. Also going to use serverless. I mean, I saw that session of how do you partner with serverless. It's really cool technology, and especially we're building modern apps. We feel serverless is really amazing. So I have the serverless CLI installed as well, and I've got that information in the prereq section out here somewhere. And what I'm going to be doing is first showing you how to create an Okta tenant so as to create those users and register apps for authorization. And then I'm going to be showing you how we can connect the dots with some critical AWS services. In this scenario, I'm going to be using AWS API Gateway with Lambda function in Node.js. And I'm going to be talking about the subtle differences between the latest one and the one which is the legacy API Gateway. Also going to be talking about application load balancer and using ALB for your resources. And next, talking about a mobile app. So with that being said, you can either sign up for a developer account by going to developer.okta.com and clicking on this button called sign up. But there's a faster way. I mean, as developers, we're all about using the CLI. So I've also installed the Okta CLI. If you have Homebrew, you need to install the Okta CLI using Brew. I already have this set up, and you can get information in that GitHub repo. But I'm going to quickly register for a new account. And I'm going to use Manish. Yeah. And guys, feel free to send me emails at this address, and I work for Okta. So,
Manish, can you sorry to interrupt, can you zoom in on that screen? It's hard for us to see.
Is that better?
A few more times might do it.
All right. All right. So while it's, there we go. So while it's done that, it's created a new Okta tenant for us with this Okta org. And I am going to copy this, paste this in here. All right, and I should have gotten an email. So I just got an email as well. I'm going to enter my verification code here. It's going to verify it, and I just need to set up my password. So let me do this here.
Hopefully you're entering a very secure password and not password 123.
No, I use change 123. Oh, sorry.
I think we might have lost. I think he got hacked, like as that was happening. Just kidding. Yeah, we're having a bit of difficulty here. Now Young is Manish, actually. Let's see. He'll jump back in. Here he comes.
All right, something just happened.
Yeah, that's okay. It's okay.
Welcome back, Manish.
Thank you.
This is all part of Twitch experience.
I got a notification about something about a push notification. Don't know what happened. All right, so I'm gonna save my password. All right, so this is the Okta dashboard. We have, as you can see, we have a directory. It's a universal directory. This is where all the users who need to authenticate with your app are stored. Let me add 2 people here. Young.
If you could also zoom in to that, that'll be great.
All right.
A couple more times just to make it easier. Perfect.
All right. So I'm also adding users manually for now, and I'll explain to you why I'm doing this. There's also something called self-service registration, but we can take it on in just a bit. All right, so I have 2 users here. Let me also add Claudine.
And while you do that, we have a question. And you might be answering this later, but can you use Okta with ICAM and Active Directory?
Yes. So you can definitely use users in Okta itself, but there is another mechanism where you can connect to an Active Directory as a source of truth, and you can set up your Active Directory as the source for your authentication information.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And you can also use identity providers. Let me just walk you through this. We support both social IDPs like Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Apple, as well as any OpenID compliant IDP. For most legacy infrastructure, where you're speaking about Microsoft or using any other SAML IDP, we support SAML 2.0 as well. But in this example, I'm just going to be showcasing the users which are stored and created in Okta itself. You notice that I created these users using the UI here, but I can also enable self-service registration. So I can have this sign-up link, and the user must verify the email to be activated. And let me click on Save here. All right. So that's it. From the setup of Okta. Now I'm going to clone this repo. All right. What I'm going to be starting off first with is a web application. It's written in Vue. There's no reason why it couldn't have been written in Angular or React or just plain JavaScript. But I kind of like Vue, and I get to. It's a good choice to make. But Okta provides SDKs for almost all of those SPA frameworks. All right, so I go to Howdy partner here. The first thing I want to show you is this file called currently there are placeholders here. What I can also do with Okta CLI is I can use some of the template information which I've stored in -Okta and use that to register this application from your console. So when I click Okta, and let me actually switch back to the Okta tenant here, you can see that it just created a new app called AWS Howdy Partner. So this is done, and it created this client ID 0A something something 5, and that matches this out here. And if I go back to the environment, you can see that it replaced the placeholders with your actual tenant information as well as client. Because it increases productivity. It also showcases the fact you can APIs to things like applications, and it's really used for DevOps and CI/CD. All right. So once we go here, let me just give you some more details about this app. This is a SPA app. It uses Pixie. It's the most for folks out there, do not use implicit flow. Use Pixie. It specifies that authors code page, and it's got some login and logout redirect URLs, which is localhost 8080. All right. So now this is done. All I need to do is run it. So ls-al. I go to the SPA folder, and I npm install. This is a Node app, so sorry, it's a single page app in Vue. I need to install the package dependencies first. And while it is waiting to install, let me also another.
Manish just got a quick question here about, I guess, a little more detailed explanation on PKCE might be good to some of our viewers. They're less familiar with the concept.
Yeah, definitely. PKCE stands for proof key for code exchange. It's quite a mouthful, but the way you pronounce it is PKCE. So previously, for JavaScript apps which are only running on your browser, because it didn't have any client secrets, it was possible to introduce man-in-the-middle attacks because somebody could intercept the code and use that to actually exchange that for tokens from the back end. This is a huge bug and a huge vulnerability in the implicit flow. So what happens in PKCE is before the flow begins, you create this pair which kind of simulates a client secret, but this is done on a per session basis. And then you sign the exchange using this particular dynamically generated client secret. And by virtue of signing it and verification is a secret, you can be sure that there's no way anybody can introduce man-in-the-middle attack, and this interaction with the authorization server, which is Okta in this case, is going to be very secure. Right. So while we are here, this looks good, and I'm going to do npm start. So I'm starting a development server, and this is going to be running the Vue app locally on my machine. So let me click on this. All right. So this is a Vue app. It showcases custom login page with sign-in widget. If you click on login, it provides you a form which you can use to enter information. I need to enter the password at some point, so let me just move the screen, move the monitor off screen, and enter that in. Just give me a sec. All right, so I'm going to first start with Nish Sahu password. And let's just give it a split. All right, is that my internet or something else? Fantastic. Okay, that was my internet. Okay, so this is the logged in experience, and here you remember I created a user, Young, and all this web app does is it displays the user information. But what is important is Okta actually, as a part of PKCE flow and using OpenID, it actually mints an ID token and an access token. And in the ID token are a whole bunch of claims, which is standard as a part of OIDC. And some of them are the email, like the young@mailneighbor.com, the given name, the family name, what is the time zone, what time I created it in Unix time, and whether the email is verified or not. So this is the ID token. But when you're building out that web app or a mobile app, you actually need to interact with an API, which is actually the guts of your app. You know, what are you protecting this app for? What is that sorts of information which you want to showcase or provide some personalization options for this end user. And for that, I have this tab here called Messages. And here I get this message here saying, fail to fetch messages. It seems like something is not running in port 8000. All right. So I'm now going to switch back to Visual Studio Code here and show you exactly what's happening. So I'm click on Open and click on Howdy Partner.
So
And
what is the message supposed to be displaying there if everything is correct?
is everything working? Yeah. So I was just going to get to that, which is the resource server, and this is where AWS comes in. You know, all the APIs, they could be, the ones which you want to expose to the user. It may be your posts or shopping cart items. You know, all of these are actually APIs which are rendered in a single page app. And even though they might have fancy images, they're just maybe REST or maybe some of the format. And those are JSON objects which you have to render in your single page app. So what I'm going to do now is show you that resource server. This is running here. And all it does is I'm going to be rendering this JSON blob, which tells you Howdy Partner and the term Okta plus AWS equal to awesome, along with some updated date time. So I'm going to be showing you first how to do it locally, because you're pretty much running the single page app locally, so you want to test it out. So let me go here. Instead of going to single page app, let me go to resource server. Same thing as before. Let me install dependencies. This is a Node Express app, and Express is a web application framework. It's very simple to use. Most of all, uses JavaScript, and all the samples which I've written here all use JavaScript. There's no reason why you couldn't write that in any language of your choice. So it could be Java, it could be Scala, whatever you want, as long as it returns the same JSON object which you're expecting on the front end. So now that I have it, let me run this and just run the resource server on port 8000. And if I go here and go to port 8000, you can see that you just get a single message saying, hello, there's not much to see here. Please grab one of the front-end samples to use with the server. And the actual API which we'll be using in a single-page app is the /API/messages. And if I access this directly, I get an error message saying unauthorized. And the reason is this API is protected using API access management. It expects a token in the header, which is not provided by default when you're accessing it through the browser. And that's why it shows up as unauthenticated as well as unauthorized. But if I go back here, now that this port 8000 is available and I click on Start, it actually renders this page and shows Howdy Partner and Okta plus AWS is equal to anybody? Awesome. So how many minutes did it take? 5 minutes to set this up. This was fairly simple, but that's not what I'm here for. There's more. I already showed you the resource server, but I want to talk about serverless and API gateway. So I actually have 2 different serverless projects. I'm first going to go with a simple API gateway v2, which is the version of API gateway which you just announced last December. We think is really cool. It's really easy to build these resource servers which are protected using tokens, OAuth or OIDC tokens. But there's one more thing I need to VI. So I have a serverless.yaml, same as before. It's just got one message called get messages, It has a bunch of scopes, but it uses something called a Okta JOT authorizer. And what it's telling us is this token needs to be minted by this particular shore URL, which is the Okta tenant which is created. So let me just go here and give it a unique name. So Howdy. All right, and let me deploy this. I know you can use the AWS UI or use CloudFormation templates to deploy apps, but serverless is pretty cool, and it's got a DSL which is very, very easy to understand, and it demos pretty well as well. So behind the scenes, when you do a serverless deploy, it's creating the CloudFormation stack for this project, which uses API Gateway v2, and it has a Lambda function, which is very similar to the Express Node app, which I wrote. I also need to go and update my single-page app. So in my single-page app, when I go here, and I go to config.js, all right, it's here. All right, let's see how this is doing. It's still taking a little time. And while it's doing that, let me actually show you some more customization you can have. So this is the login widget from Okta. This is without writing a lot of line of code. You can customize the experience for users, companies to provide this login form. So this is called the sign-in widget. And in Okta, we have this component here called login.view. And here you can do something like, instead of a logo of the default logo, you can do something like https logo.clearbit.com/okta.com, save it. It should be hot compiled. And let's see, you see this, the UI changed. And you can change any of the titles here, which is Howdy Partner, save it, and Howdy Partner. So you can theme a lot of this. If you are really good at CSS, which I'm not, you can theme this to look any way which you feel like. If you're using passwordless, you don't need to have a password. You can enable something called passwordless path. So if you look at features, in this scenario, now you notice instead of password, if you have configured MFA, it's going to prompt you for the MFA. If you're using SMS, if you're using WebAuthn, it's going to drive you along the journey. So you don't end up writing a whole application itself to capture the credentials. All right, so I don't have any passwords, so let me just disable this. And let's see how this guy is doing out here. All right, so it just deployed this serverless stack in AWS. It's by default configured to East 1. I'm just going to replace the local host one with this one here. All right, and if I go back here and I go to Claudine this time, and again, I have, how much time do we have on this?
We have until, we have until 4 p.m. PDT.
Oh, great. I was just hurrying all the way. So I can slow down and start speaking normally again. All right, so Claudine is logged on. And this time, if I click on messages, you can see that not only is Okta plus AWS awesome, but this time it's using API Gateway v2 serverless. How do I know I'm not kidding you and bluffing you? You look at the network tab, look at XHR. Let's get this again. Refresh it. All right, so there's a messages API. And if you look here, it's actually going out to the serverless endpoint, which is using AWS and API Gateway v2. And the response is this JSON payload. which we use, which is rendered in the single page app. All right. So that's the first question. I mean, I worked with a whole bunch of accounts. AWS is very, very popular in almost all the accounts. I think it's a de facto. And this is one design pattern which they use, where they use the best breed and enterprise grade IDP like Okta, along with the resource server, which is hosted in AWS, which is API gateway and Lambdas. So I'm now going to just showcase a little more about the API gateway v2. I showed you the serverless YAML, and folks, this is really easy to define all your dependencies, whether it uses cores or not, what type of payload it expects, is it a simple proxy or not, where does the API Gateway v2 authorizer look for the headers. It's going to be, in this case, looking for the authorization header as a bearer token. And the next is, it's going to get a token. So let me actually switch back here and look at the headers. You look here, you can see the single page app is actually passing the header in here as a bearer token. I'm now going to go to jsonwebtoken.io. And this is a place to just decode the JOT and understand what's going on. This token is not opaque, it's actually transparent. So there's a lot you can do with this information. You can use any library to unwrap this. This is basic4 encoded. As you can see, you would decode it first and then verify the signature to make sure it's coming from the actual issuer. You want to check it's this issuer. You also have access to the keys, so you can go to Okta and make sure that the signature is actually coming from somebody who is Okta and not someone who is claiming to be Okta. And again, all the claims which I showed you in the profile page of the single page app, they are in this JSON Web Token. Like I said, this is something which you can introspect and without having a phone home. I previously worked for a company where these tokens were opaque, and every time you needed to verify that this was indeed valid, it needed to go back to the authorization server and say, is this valid? And there was this undue burden on the authorization server. Now with the separation of responsibilities, a resource server can just be sitting there looking for these tokens and just needs to validate the signature and verify that it's from the sign of these keys, and that's it. And the next thing it does is looks in the claims and sees whether it can make the appropriate decisions. All right. So this is a new capability in API Gateway v2 with its authorizers. You can use any name for Okta authorizer name. I've used Okta.authorizer, but just you specify the fields necessary for validating the jobs. Next, I have only one serverless function, which is get messages. The actual handler, which is the business part of the API, which is in messages handler out here. And finally, this serverless function is going to create a API gateway, which has a route configured for /API messages. It uses the JOT authorizer, and it ensures that it has these OpenID profile and email scopes. Obviously, if you're writing this to spec, you would have a scope per function, and you can set this up both on Okta side as well as a serverless, which is something called, let's say you did something like read messages. So you would need to create the scope in Okta out here. Let me go here and go to security API. And in the authorizers, you would need to create a scope called read messages. create this. And on the authorization side, when the single page app is requesting a token from Okta, it needs to tell. And I'm switching back and forth a lot. I hope you're able to follow this, but you can specify what scopes you want to request. So maybe you want to request read messages. And then all you need to do is redeploy the SPA, the serverless YAML, and API Gateway v2 is going to ensure that there is some level of authorization. Only users who are configured for read messages can actually read messages. And folks who want to write messages, maybe the admin users, if they don't have a write messages claim, which also needs to be configured, if they don't have that scope, then they will not be able to perform that operation.
Cool. Manish, before we move further, I think it may be time for a quick recap and summary in case new viewers are just now joining us on Twitch. This is Howdy Partner. We highlight cool APN partners here at Howdy Partner who are doing really cool things to help AWS customers with their use of AWS. My name is Claudine Morales. I'm joined by my co-host, Young Jong. And Manish, what are you demoing here and why is it important for them to pay attention?
All right, so if you flash back 30 minutes back, I gave this situation where there's a friend of yours who's got this really brilliant idea for a business, but wants you to create a web app or a mobile app for them. And I was showing you how this could be easily created using Okta as an identity platform and using AWS as the resource server or the source for your API calls. And in about 20 minutes, we spun up an Okta tenant, created users using the UI or management APIs. We deployed a single page app in that Okta tenant. And next, we have deployed both a local resource server running Node.js and Express, as well as API Gateway v2 deployed on my AWS instance, and have this application connect the dots between the single page app, Okta for authentication and authorization, and API and AWS for providing us the data to render in our single page app.
Cool. So basically, if you're somebody in tech, and I think most of us here are in tech, you should totally pay attention because we all get the question of, hey, you should build this app. So yeah, I think this is going to really help us all with that. So thanks for that really helpful summary, Manish. And yeah, let's move on.
Well, before we move on, there was one question about. So
I see that.
You kind of breezed through a little bit while you were looking through some of the configurations here. Someone was asking to talk a little bit more about JSON Web Tokens.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely want to speak from experience. This has definitely been in the evolution of tokens. This is the most modern way to get information from, especially when you're separating out the authorization and token servers, which is Okta, and a resource server, which is AWS or Local Express. So this is a highly optimized solution which enforces the highest level of security. And the reason I say that is we all know about that app or that website which has been broken into and credentials have been compromised and accounts have been compromised, right? And usually the fault is on the IDP. But what I'm saying is, do not build that IDP infrastructure from scratch. Use a platform for custom identity and access management. We prefer to use Okta, but Okta is going to be the safe for your user credentials and it's going to be stored for all the user information. But that if now you just created a silo and you need to somehow extract this data from the silo and utilize it to unlock some other information in some other third-party system. And JOTs represent one such mechanism. OpenID Connect is actually the protocol behind this. And what it allows you to do is whatever your profile information, which is in Okta, such as your emails, your group memberships, you might even have some custom claims. Let's say your frequent flyer number, if you're speaking to a airline company and you need to show this information, any profile attribute, you want to expose this. But in order to expose this, you want to do it in a way which is secure and which is not susceptible to compromise. So the way the experts recommend is to sign this token, and JOT is one of the mechanisms. SAML is another one, but it's really probably decades old technology at this point. JSON is the newer, more modern way of doing things, but you encapsulate the information in JSON, and then you sign it, and along with this, and then you actually insert the header, which has a signature information of the key ID, and then you send this entire package to your resource server for verification. And the reason why this performs so well is all the resource server needs to do is to verify this token, which is a cryptographic task to ensure that the signature is valid, using the right algorithm, using the right keys, and that's it. And that's all the resource server needs to do. And folks can be banging on the APIs as much as possible, trying to compromise the resource servers. But if you have JOT verification, it's a very difficult problem to break into such a system. So that's why JOTs are the way to do things these days.
Excellent. And now we can move on with more demos.
All right. So as you can already guess, I'm a fan of serverless. I'm a fan of API gateway. I love functions as a service. I love Node and JavaScript. But again, you don't need to just use JavaScript. This serverless project, it could have been written in Java. It could be written in your favorite language. As long as AWS allows you, supports that in the API gateway as Lambda function languages, you can write this out. I only use this so I could use one language across the single page app and the resource service. I also use API Gateway v2, and I just want to show you, it's just so simple to do things with API Gateway v2. It already has a pre-configured an authorizer for OIDC tokens, and all you need to do is fill in the blanks, specify where you need to pluck out the tokens, specify what issuer URL for the OIDC, and finally, if there's any audience, how do you supply that information? And with that, all you need to do is focus on the meat or the guts of your project, which is providing you that payload for your resource, which is your messages. Howdy partner, Okta awesome, using API Gateway v2 serverless, right? So this is great. And this will work for a good chunk of the use cases. But there are other sorts of use cases which are very useful, which can only be served with API Gateway v1. I actually started using out API Gateway v1, and I really embrace this. And we've built really, really complicated authorization use cases using API Gateway v1. The only difference between, one of the big differences between API Gateway v1 v2 is that even the JOT verification or the authorization, it's handled as a separate Lambda function. So rather than having just one Lambda, one serverless function for get messages, you also need to have another function for validating the JOT tokens. And finally, in your get messages, you need to specify the authorizer which you're using, and connect the dots with the serverless function for Okta authentication authorization. So what I'm going to do here is just show you what an authorizer looks like. And it's got a lot of scaffolding, and it looks like primed for something which could be improved. But this is very, very powerful, like I mentioned, and it solves a class of problems which cannot be solved using API Gateway v2. The first thing you'll notice is, just like in a local Express server, you would need to use another library for JOT verification. On NPM, we have already published our JOT verifier, so I'm just referring to it out here. And I specify what is issuer ID and client ID, which I need to validate the JOT tokens. And secondly, you need to verify the access token. So I'm verifying the access token. I'm getting the information out from the header and specifying what audience to use. And finally, when I get my verification succeed, I need to create a auth policy document. So this is a AWS concept which tells you what is allowed and what is not allowed based on this token. So let's suppose in this scenario, I'm just saying you can call get API messages, but this can be a lot more powerful. You can say that, this token, I only allow you to use get, but if there's another token which has access to other claims or other scopes, I want it to do get, put, post, but not delete. Or you want some star style operation, which is like you want to have an override like this, and now you can access messages across all the user base, or you can only have it for Claudine here. So this is very, very powerful. We actually we have built out very complicated solutions using API Gateway v1. So once you have this, once you spit out this API, the AWS auth policy, you can provide some other information which is going to be returned in the context. And this context is going to be, I hope I didn't make any changes which are unintended. But if you look at messages, this looks pretty similar to the one out here. But all the information from the Lambda authorizer is actually passed as a request context authorizer object, and you can get some information from there, like the subject or some other claims, and you can use it to render information here. And what I'm trying to do in API Gateway v1 is just display Howdy partner and the name of the user. All right. So let's get started here and go back to using Lambda authorizer. And as before, I'm going to install dependencies. And I am going to use, and this is something which is a part of using serverless. Yeah, I just ran this before and I haven't deleted the stack, so I didn't want to have a conflict in the name when it creates a CloudFormation stack. But I have just changed the name and now I'm going to deploy this. And let's see how long this will take.
So in the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to type in the chat. So I had a question. So with the version 2 and the version 1, what are you sort of seeing as far as more usage? Is it just heavily dependent on different use cases, or is there one favoring the other, or is there any kind of patterns you're seeing as far as different usages between the two?
I mean, I'm going to first off start off by saying this Lambda, the legacy API Gateway v1, it's got a lot of scaffolding, and the fact that you need to create this policy doc, which is cached, which is great because if it sees the same token again, it checks in the API Gateway cache to see if there's a policy doc, and it reuses this, so it's very high performant. But there's a lot of information like the API Gateway on ARN, account ID, the region, REST API ID stays, and all that stuff. And there's a lot of work. So I think developers initially were like, we need something simpler for the 80% of use cases which we are seeing. And I guess, and I don't work for AWS, and maybe you would know better, but this is something which out of the blocks, without having to write that complicated bit of code, somebody can write a resource server and just use an out-of-the-box JOT authorizer and use that to validate tokens. So I think it's more about simplicity. It also has a lot of capability out of the box. You can enable cores out of the box. In API Gateway v1, it's the responsibility of the Lambda function to define the headers. And I can guarantee you that if you're writing a single page app and you have API Gateway v1, one of the first errors which you've seen is about the cores was not allowed, right? So
did you actually talk about what cores is?
Yeah, so core stands for cross-origin
resource sharing.
Yes, cross-origin resource sharing. So by virtue of the architecture where you have an authorization server running probably on a separate tenant, on a separate URL, like let's say login.howdypartner.com, and your resource server is running on API.howdypartner.com, and they're different domains or different origins. They don't have there's a difference in the prefix, which is login and API. So the single page app, it uses JavaScript. The browser has a restriction which prevents it from automatically communicating with a different origin. So it's going to block that. So the browser is going to say, sorry, this JavaScript call is not allowed, and you won't be able to do anything with it. And what you can whitelist on your resource server is you can say, yes, I enable cores and allow these endpoints to access it, which is api.howdypartner.com. So when api.howdypartner.com hits login, login is going to say, yeah, I trust this origin. I'm going to let it access and actually provide a successful response to it. So that's what cores means. It's really useful for single page apps.
Thanks for that, Manish. And we're just getting a notice here that we actually need to be completely done by 3:45 p.m. That is actually our, but we have plenty of time still, so.
All right, so let me just wrap this up and just show you, and for folks out there, I wanted to highlight some of the AWS services which are very popular with our common customers, and this is one of them. I'm going to go back to our single page app here and go to config, and I'm going to replace the resource server messages URL with this new one. So paste this in, you can see it's updated. The single page app should have reflected. So this was using this, and I clicked this, and now it's saying Howdy Partner Cloudine.com, and this is coming from the custom Lambda authorizer. Right? But what we've done is just amazing. You've built this app, and we provide you with the SDKs to authenticate, to cap login experience, the self-service registration experience. And if I just go back here, if I go here, so there's one more thing which I need to do, which was if I go to login, I could do features, registration true. Yep. And if I go back here, now you would see don't have an account, sign up. You can sign up. So rather than me going into the Okta tenant and manually adding users, there are pretty much every B2C app where users want to self-register, and this is the way where you do that. So Okta powers the entire experience for registration, sign-in, passwordless, MFA, whatever you want. So you can focus on just the business side of it, which is creating that resource server in AWS API Gateway and Lambda, and rendering that experience in your single-page app. And what I've just shown you is the modern way of doing it using single-page app, serverless, and obviously Okta. All right, so that concludes the web side of things. Obviously, folks would like to use MVC apps like Node Express. It's a lot simpler with MVC apps because you don't need to worry about cores. You don't need to store tokens on the browser and local storage or anything like that. It's all handled by the web application framework like Express. So MVC apps are a lot simpler, but the advantage of single page app is you can deploy it in a CDN like CloudFront, AWS CloudFront. You can upload the production version of your single page app, and you can deploy this on the edge. So somebody in Europe is trying to access your single page app, they get it in the jiffy. And we all know that the longest time for rendering a single page app is on loading the assets. And by virtue of CDNs being located so close to the edge, the experience is a lot faster. And that's why services like CDNs and services like AWS CloudFront are really amazing to use. And I haven't shown you how to deploy this in CDN, but it's fairly simple. You just go to CloudFront and you zip up the deployment folder of the SPA, upload it in there, specify whether you want to use a custom domain or you just use the CloudFront URLs. And instead of going to localhost 8080, you go to the CloudFront URL and bang, you're right in accessing the single page app. All right.
Sounds good.
All right.
Sounds like you mentioned something about mobile app.
Yeah, of course. Mobile is a rage these days, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, everybody has a cell phone in their hand, right? So, spend a lot of time doing whatever they're doing on phones these days. So, you're right. Cell phones are becoming an integral part of our lives.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think it's just the few of us dinosaurs who are left with laptops, but the predominant population uses mobile apps to interact with a customer's products or services, and I think that's why the Apples and the Googles and Amazons are focusing so much of their time and energy, which is on mobile. And companies like Okta are focusing on mobile, so those exact same customers can access the resources which they need. So I have another GitHub repo, and Young, Claudine, if you can share that, so folks can look at this repo and follow along. It's got a lot of good documentation, copious notes, screenshots, obviously, because folks love screenshots. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build a mobile app, and it's going to be cross-platform, so it'll run on both Android and iOS. And that's by virtue of the fact that this is written in React Native. And what I also want to showcase in here is you can tailor the login experience completely. So unlike in a web app where I showed you the sign-in widget, which you could just customize, what I've done here is I've used material design to create the form and the text fields to capture the login and password. And I also have buttons where you can sign in with Apple or also self-register. So as you can see, this is completely created with the native look and feel. There are no web views, and the reason is because you want a better experience for end users. Native is the way to go. And React Native obviously creates these UI elements in the native frameworks, either on iOS or in Android. It's just the logic which is written in JavaScript, and that's why they have a JavaScript interpreter as a part of the runtime. And it's going to be pretty much the same thing as the web app which I showed you. Once a user logs in, they see a user profile with the claims. And next, to show the resources which are on AWS API Gateway and Lambda, we just render this in a bunch of cards and display them along with their timestamps. Again, very, very simple, but the fact it's simple is because Okta ships with SDKs for your mobile development platform. In this case, we have React Native SDK, which allows you to easily build that login and registration or sign in with Apple experience. We're also using some more capability for React navigation to ensure that only a logged in user can access certain parts of the screen. And once it's logged out, or if the user hasn't logged in, they wouldn't ever be able to access those screens. This is written in React Native. I'm going to clone this and try and get this up and running before our cutoff time of 3:45. All right, so git clone. All right, so as before, I'm just going to click. I'm going to say, actually, before I do that, I have to show you the config. So if you were doing this manually by hand, you would need to specify the client ID. You need to specify the issuer. You need to specify the messages URL. Standard stuff. But if you use Okta Start, it is going to create a new application for you here. So right now it's only got AWS Howdy Partner. I'm going to click on. I'm going to run this command Okta Start. It's going to configure a new OIDC app. It's created this with client ID and gives you some more instructions about how to build this app. So if I refresh the page in my tenant here, you can see it created an Okta mobile. And here it uses Pixie as well. But now it's actually a native app and uses authorization code. And it's got some callback URL. These are actually callbacks for your mobile app. So I specified com Okta example callback. And these are callbacks used when you're exchanging your codes for your tokens. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is install the dependencies. And while I'm doing that, let me also show you, I have a simulator here. So I have a Mac machine, and I get to utilize this simulator here. I mean, you could always install your personal device and run these apps here. Currently, this doesn't have any of your custom apps here. All right. So this is done, and now I need to start. I need to install pods. So pods are, another dependency mechanism. Actually, the full form is CocoaPods. And if you go to CD iOS, you would need to have CocoaPods installed on your developer workstation. It's going to install all the dependencies which are specified in package.json and auto-link them for you. Fantastic. All right, so we're back here. Let me just see what all I need to do. So I've installed the CocoaPods. Now I need to start React Native start. So I'm going to do npx React Native start. And this is the Metro app, which is part of React Native. This is used for debugging an application. So I have this, and next I'm going to run the iOS in the iOS sample. So here, and this could take a little time, so we'll just be a little patient.
So that config file pretty much do all the things you need to run to get this up and working, from the looks of it.
Yes, and actually that's the power of the Okta CLI. I mean, you know, I use the AWS CLI. I would rather use the AWS CLI than to log into the AWS web console and administer the objects. I'm a power user, so I prefer the AWS CLI. Similarly, to create all these artifacts and connect the dots between apps and authorization servers and scopes, I use the Okta CLI. And use that to set this up. So you can also always go through the steps of going through UI and typing the stuff out, but it doesn't demo very well, especially when you're short of time. All right, so it's building the app. Like I said, this is written in React Native. I think the longest time in this demo, it's going to be showing you the part where it builds the app and renders it. So while we're waiting for it, any questions on the channel?
This will be time for you to enter it. Could be the last chance to kind of get your questions in about everything so far. I guess I'll also take this time to kind of summarize what we've done so far. For everyone, we're an AWS Howdy partner Twitch channel or Twitch show. We are a show that showcases our partner and cool things they're doing. Today we had Manish from Okta showing us how easy it is to build a simple web app. And right now we're in the process of building a mobile app using Okta to kind of secure your identity user bases, sort of doing that undifferentiated heavy lifting and in a way leaving you with having to only do your solve your business problems rather than having to deal with the nitty-gritty of setting everything up here. So hopefully the app is getting built. It's still taking some time.
It's taking some time. But if there are any other questions, happy to take questions about mobile. Actually, about mobile. Sign-in with Apple is huge right now. And, Apple's known for its privacy. They have this capability where you can sign into websites or to mobile apps, even Android apps. If you have a iOS device which has biometrics, either Touch ID or Face ID, you would need to go through a configuration steps on the Apple developer website, developer.apple.com, and set this up. All right. I may need to expose my password.
So I know we have a question here. I know we haven't really touched up on this during this demo today, but there are some questions about using Okta with Cognito or Okta with AWS SSO. What are the differences between the two? If that's something you can talk a little bit more in detail about, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. So I briefly covered this after Claudine's introduction. AWS has IAM roles and users, but in scenarios where you already have Okta and you want to leverage the Okta user directory as the source for your users and the groups and the role mappings. Then AWS has opened up their management API so it can single sign on into Okta. So that is what we consider as the workforce side of Okta. And so rather than entering your native AWS credentials, when you log into AWS, if you're configured that correctly, you'll be actually redirected to Okta where you authenticate with Okta, and you would be redirected back to AWS, and it's the same federated identity setup. You're single signed in, and now you have one place where you have your users and groups instead of having to duplicate your users and groups across all the different platforms. And that is one of the core strengths of Okta, which is in the single sign-on capabilities. But that is more on the workforce side. On this session, I'm talking about the consumer or the customer identity side of things, where you're building experiences for web apps and mobile apps. All right, so I'm just quickly going to enter the password. I'm moving away from screen because iOS shows you the password in full. So I'm back here. I'm going to click on login. And there we go. So you have Claudine show up, and you can see her given name, her email. And now if I click here, it's going to go to a local resource server, but you know what? It's running the simulator in its own virtual device. It doesn't have access to it. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to go, I'm going to open this up and change the resource URL to be the resource URL which was out here. So let me go back here. Let me just use API Gateway v2. I'm getting this serverless info so I can get the endpoints again. So I got this endpoint, and we go back here, and I'm going to update my config, and it should in theory hot reload. I mean, that's the selling point, right? So I go back here and change my messages URL to the AWS gateway. It should have reloaded. Are you recompiling? Okay, maybe I need to start it up again. And the second time I do it, it's not going to. Okay, there we go. Now you see Howdy Partner, Okta Awesome, using API Gateway v2 serverless. So here you're seeing I've just built a mobile app that uses Okta along with, and now you can see the endpoint displayed here, and you can see the actual resource, which is the resource server information, which is available in API Gateway. And now he's just built this awesome mobile app using Okta and AWS.
Sounds great. Oh.
I also want to talk about sign up, but you know we just got a minute. Setting up AWS, sign up with Apple and Okta, you would need to go to security, identity providers, add an identity, add Apple, and you need to configure. You need to copy paste a lot of stuff. I don't think we have time for this, but it's really amazing the fact that you can log in just by using Face ID or Touch ID and have access to your whole app and the contents in there.
Sounds great.
Sorry, we're out of time.
You.
Would have loved to see that. But if there's a resource that you could share with our viewers, so that if they want to replicate this process, they could probably do it on their own. Yeah, it sounds like we need another episode with you, Manish. AM was shouting at the chat. So.
All right, I'm only glad to oblige. And I think this went flawlessly. So I want to thank the demo gods for being gracious. It went fairly smoothly.
Yeah, you did great. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks everybody for joining us for this episode of Howdy Partner. Manish, that was great. We learned a lot from you. Hopefully we get to see you again. Young, thanks for joining me.
No problem. I had a great time learning a lot.
Awesome. We'll see you at the next episode of Howdy Partner, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye, guys.